in both the air and the water. And both of these things are fueling climate change, which Acterra is really, really concerned with. That's what I'm going to talk about today. So who is Acterra? We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We've been around since 1970. Actually, we were formed from the combination of the Peninsula Conservation Center Foundation and a group called Bay Area Action. And our mission is to bring people together to create local solutions for a healthy planet. And we bring together, that means community members, it means local governments and community leaders, businesses, corporations, other nonprofits. So we like to be a convener organization. And right now our biggest concern is climate change. And a big proportion of that is understanding the equity piece and environmental justice. It's because if we can bring down our greenhouse gas emissions, that will help reduce climate impacts for especially the under-resourced and vulnerable communities. So here's a little overview of Acterra's programs. We have let's see, we have on the bottom left and the top right, we have our electrification programs. One of them is about electric vehicles, so getting people to switch away from fossil fuel powered vehicles, which create greenhouse gas emissions, and move to cleaner transportation. And then we have our Green at Home program, which is about electrifying the appliances in your home and moving off of fossil fuel in terms of your heating, your cooling, and your cooking, and using solar power, other renewables. We have a food program, and this picture here on the top left is from a film screening that we did during the pandemic in September last year of The Invisible Vegan. And it was all about food sovereignty and switching to a more plant-forward, plant-based diet for better health as well as better environmental consequences. And we have a Youth Be the Change program, which is new this year for middle schoolers to learn about climate solutions and climate science. And we also have a workplace sustainability program. And so this picture is from a local project called A la Carte, which was a group project of both Loaves and Fishes Family Kitchen and joint venture Silicon Valley, serving San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. It's a food recovery program. And the reason it's on this slide is because it won the 2020 Business Environmental Award. And it's a program that saves food from tech campuses and redistributes it to those in need at no cost. And so that's an example of a business that is doing sustainable, contributing to sustainability practices that we wanted to recognize. And so this slide is just a reminder of how all these things are interlinked. So we have the climate effects, things like sea level rise, and other factors might be something like heat waves, heat extremes, and those are exacerbated by many conditions, like maybe you live in a city with a lot of blacktop and not a lot of shade, then you're going to have higher impacts from climate change. That's the sort of climate justice realm. Then we have on the right, energy justice, and that's all about, do you have access to energy that is affordable? Do you have access to energy that is clean? And so that's something that Acterra is really concerned with. And then those two are looped and together with environmental justice and the suffering, the unequal, disproportionate suffering of impacts for communities of color and low-income communities. And so I told you I was going to talk about electrification. So why is electrification important? Because the alternative, fossil fuels, is something that pollutes, and pollution actually is really, really, really bad for our health. We're learning more about this every year. Every year there's more and more studies that show pollution is actually a major killer. So particles are responsible for 3,000 deaths, 5,500 new childhood asthma cases per year in the Bay Area. And then if you compare business as usual to an electrification scenario, you can actually save 12,000 premature deaths by switching away from something that creates a lot of PM 2.5, a lot of particle pollution. So that's the impetus, that's the motivation for electrification. Whoops, sorry about that. And so then we come to the question of affordability. What if we have a lot of clean tech, we have a lot of clean energy, but it's too expensive for people to use? That's not acceptable. We need to find ways for people to be able to afford clean energy. And so I'm going to talk about two examples that we're doing at Acterra. One is making electric vehicles more affordable for folks. If you're an income qualifying individual, you can attend our financial incentives clinics, and those are a way for people to learn, what are the rebates out there that save money and allow people to actually be able to afford electric vehicles and not have it be something that's out of reach for people. And then a second example that we're working on right now is with our policy team. We're working on EV charging advocacy. And so the idea here is that if you don't have a place to charge your vehicle, that's going to make a huge barrier to electric vehicle adoption. So we need to make sure that housing comes equipped with access to EV charging. Just ports, even just a simple 120 outlet would be enough to do slow trickle charging. So right now we're waiting for the go-ahead to invite public comment to this group Cal Green, which is responsible for updating the building codes. And what we want to tell Cal Green is make sure that people have access to power for charging. And now I'm going to switch and talk about our Healthy Food for All program. So this is a program we call Healthy Plate, Healthy Planet, because we're both concerned with health on a personal individual level and also the health of the environment and the planet. And so some of the issues that we're tackling here are the problem of food deserts. I know that Kevin's probably going to speak more about this in a little bit, and how affordable, again, is food, is healthy food. At Acterra, we believe that healthy food is something that everyone should be able to access. So how do we help this along? One way we're trying to approach it is from the top down, working together with cities, local governments, to try to get them to certain pledges and certain commitments at the institutional level, maybe to serve a large market. Maybe that's through schools, maybe that's through the jail system. I mean, any kind of large scale procurement, we want to work with cities to encourage them to go plant forward and to also cut food waste and also promote food recovery. So this is what I was just talking about. We're working on developing a possible summit for next year with a bunch of other environmental groups. And some of these are listed at the bottom: Fresh Approach, Better Food Foundation, Spur. And we're all working together to follow what is already existing in another model called the C40 Good Food Cities. And that's a sort of a pledge thing as well. And the final example I was going to talk about is we're doing some new outreach to the Latinx community, and we're using social media as that method of kind of community building, and hoping to partner with other Latinx organizations and influencers to convey this message of healthy eating and how it's good for you and good for the planet. And I think that is my last slide. Oh, I'm exactly at 10 minutes. So thanks so much. And I'll pass it on to Kevin, I guess.
Cool. I just wanted to say thank you for that, Wendy. That was incredible. This was actually, connecting with Wendy was the first time that I was learning about Acterra, so it was just really cool and exciting to hear about all the work that they're doing in terms of actual programs and advocacy, and like that's super amazing. Like that's super ahead, I feel like, and we need more people doing this type of work. So snaps to Wendy. All right, I'll just jump in. I have a couple of notes. I don't have any video or slides for y'all, but I have a couple of videos to share later. So you have to. Oh no, my video's been spotlighted now, so now I'm really big on my own screen. All right, I changed it to gallery so it doesn't freak me out. Cool. What's up, everybody? My name is Kevin Madrigal. I am born and raised in South San Francisco and the co-founder and now board member of Farming Hope. Farming Hope is a small nonprofit that started actually in Palo Alto. Wendy was mentioning some orgs that I was getting memories of because we used to do some volunteer work with a shelter that used food from loaves and fishes. So that's cool. It's cool that y'all are based in Palo Alto. So we started in Palo Alto and now it's in San Francisco. And Farming Hope is a social enterprise restaurant. And essentially what Farming Hope does is hire and train formerly incarcerated and homeless individuals in the food system. It's a 12-week program and there's opportunities for employment afterwards too. But right now we have a cafe in San Francisco called Manny's. It's on 16th and Valencia. And Farming Hope runs all of the food and beverages stuff there. So if you're ever in the city or looking to support, you can go check them out there. And we operate one garden at this church called New Liberation Church up in San Francisco as well. So it's definitely a combination of a few different things, like from the environmental side and then also from workers' rights. Let's see. I did want to show y'all one video, so I'm going to pull that up really quickly. Give me 1 second. Here we go. This is just kind of a video that was made last year when COVID began. That I think is really cool. That highlights some of the work we do. Let me know if it's like too loud or not loud enough, but you might have to just adjust the volume.
If you were calling your uncle and describing what you cook, what would you say?
I'd probably say a lot where he wouldn't understand it. It'd be in the detail because there's so much. Cooking is a meditation for me because when I'm cooking, I'm paying attention to what I'm doing and I'm trying to perfect what I've already perfected. Getting that perfection keeps me in my own zen and it's enjoyable.
Farming Hope is a 12-week job training program for formerly incarcerated or unhoused adults. We create dignified jobs in gardening and cooking. And right now, during COVID, we're feeding over 1,200 folks a week through donated meals to shelters and hospitals. We're here in our second brand new commissary kitchen that we're renting so that we can increase our production, increase the number of apprentices we train.
I have learned to be a line cook, a prep cook. I'm happy, that I'm able to help people, knowing what it's like to be hungry, even stressing or just even wanting to eat something to go to sleep or feel comfort, and knowing that I actually prepared a meal that I know that I would like to taste and I would like for them to let me know how it tastes. That we prepare those meals with as much love and kindness and thought and compassion as we possibly could. So it's kind of a each one teach one and pay it forward. And I mean, that's what Farming Hope is about.
Cool. Hopefully y'all were able to hear. I always love to be able to bring in some of the videos because I think a lot of the apprentices, which is what they're called when they're employees with us that work with Farming Hope, I think are all really articulate about what we're doing. And I think it's best to hear it from them. So yeah, I think there were a couple of things touched on in there that I kind of want to mention just because Wendy was talking about them. But I think a big part about environmental justice is the connection to food and climate. And I think there's a branch there, what Wendy was mentioning, that like a big contributor to fossil fuels is the industrial food production system that we have, right? And so not only is that system, the industrial food system, extractive and exploitative of our resources like nature, it's also extractive and exploitative of people and of the people that we employ. So one really big thing of Farming Hope is we pay at least minimum wage. We're trying to get these people into like actual like life-sustaining jobs, and just trying to provide better like work environments. I think that's a very, very big part that people don't think about as much, just because it's kind of a step before. Yeah, I think one thing that you saw in that video was there was some like butternut squash that was being roasted, and then there was like some chicken. And it's actually interesting, like I myself also try to eat plant-based and plant-forward because of the reasons that Wendy mentioned, the reasons like it's better for the environment, it's more energy efficient. But there's also a really cool aspect that I was able to learn more through Farming Hope work, which is like, there's this whole idea of, I'm Mexican American. My parents moved here from Mexico like in the 80s. I know a lot of my friends, a lot of people in the Bay are from immigrant communities. And if you trace back our ancestry far enough, you'll find that basically all of us used to live on a plant-based diet or something close to it. And there are some exceptions, but they're they look very different than our food system looks like today. So there's this kind of cool aspect of being able to get in touch with some of your roots and get in touch with some of that culture that's lost. But the reason I bring up the chicken though is because when Farming Hope started doing contracted meals for some of the shelters are really picky, right? Because they want food that people are gonna eat. So oftentimes, like we would make things with like tofu, and they'd be like, oh, people didn't know what to do or didn't want to eat it. So there's also this element of like, you have to pick your battles, and like it's okay to have chicken sometimes, but also like is there a way that we can introduce vegetables back, or a plant-based diet back into this in a way that's culturally like respectful and makes sense. I think that's just been a really interesting challenge, and something that will continue to come up kind of in the near future. And then I guess really quickly, I'll just show one more little segment of a video. I mentioned the garden, so I just wanted y'all to see a little bit of the garden. I'll just show like a minute of this video. These are all on YouTube. All right.
We just want to be the organizers to piece this knowledge together of how do we grow food and cook it in a way that opens up our food system, that gets people the job and the training that they need and want. So what we do is we recruit folks who are experiencing homelessness to join the Farming Hope community and put our mission into action.
But for this to work, participants have to learn the true meaning of farm to table. So the first step is in the garden with Aisha.
My role is to help facilitate the employees in the garden. So since we just planted this one, maybe we won't harvest it, but we can harvest from the rooftop garden. We water, we're also growing new plants, so we're putting seeds in the ground. We harvest every week for the kitchen. Kevin uses these in his tacos, and so being here and encouraging them to get back in touch with themselves just as much as learning about gardening, I think is important.
Then, once the produce is grown, it's...
All right, we don't have to see what 4 years ago Kevin did with his hair. We can skip over that part. But I wanted to show that part because I think I don't know, it makes me smile. It brings this feeling of like, it just feels good to reconnect with the earth. And I think that's also a really big part of environmental justice, is like, who has access to green spaces, especially in urban areas. There's a lot of science and literature that connects like just like being in a good mood, endorphins, being happy with access to green space. And so being able to provide that in a place where there might not be some green space is super important as well. And it's just super restorative. I think I can't help but remember like all these different stories about apprentices remembering with their grandmother gardening tomatoes when they were younger, just because they were in the garden with us. But yeah, so I just wanted to bring kind of that in. And yeah, I guess that's all that I'll say for now. I'd be curious to hear what more Ken has to add to the conversation. And then if y'all have questions, please continue to ask them in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. All right, so Ken will be next, and I think he will also be sharing his screen. It might take a moment. So it'll come up.
Sorry,
and then as
that.
a reminder, you can always use the Q&A function if you want to ask them any questions, and we'll also have more to talk about after these presentations. It might just be a moment. As we discovered earlier, Ken's computer is working really hard. to get the presentation up. One thing, Kevin, I'll be interested in talking to you and also, everybody here about would be talking about like the indigenous relationship to land. And I think that would be something that would be really great to discuss further, especially as we're talking about extractive means and talking about, caring for the earth, really. But yeah, okay, Ken, if you are ready, I'm going to pass it on to you.
I think the computer's still thinking a little bit. Does everyone see the presentation yet?
Yes.
Okay. Whoops. I'm sorry, something happened on my end. I can't see it.
We can see it, Ken.
Oh, I can't see the presentation on my screen. I'm so sorry about this, everybody.
That's okay. We can see it. I don't know if you remember what is on what screen. I can help you out here. Or in the meantime, while you're figuring that out, there is a question about working with unsheltered folks. And Kevin, if you have any insight that you can offer.
For sure. I was gonna say, Ken, if it's really bugging out, you could email it to me. You can find my email, and then I can share my screen. And I'm happy to just like click through. Yeah, that's a Leora. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. That's a great question, and one that with Farming Hope we've had to learn a lot about and a lot through. I mean, it feels weird, to be honest. The question, there's like a weird tension in the question for me, because I think one big part of Farming Hope was starting to like understand and to change this like story or this narrative around that like unhoused individuals or homeless individuals are somehow like different than us or not people, and like the ways of communication that one would support somebody that is housed would be different than someone's from unhoused. But that being said, there is a difference, and we do have to take that into account. I would say the biggest thing for trying to do anything to show support with like solidarity of housing folks is to get involved with any local orgs. I think like Farming Hope in the beginning, we tried to directly work with some unhoused individuals that we would find like literally when we were walking around on the street or in the garden, and we just found that it's really, really tough. It's really tough, especially if people don't have consistent phone, address, like any way of communicating. So we just always worked through different partnerships, different agencies that work with homeless individuals. And I think at the end of the day, I think that's all you can do. Like it doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel and restart reaching out to people. But yeah, just reaching out. I know that, I mean, if you're talking about specifically even San Mateo County, I know Downtown Streets team is another similar program that provides like kind of like stipend-based employment. And they're based in Palo Alto. I think they started in Palo Alto, and they're always looking for employment referrals. They're always looking for like food stuff. I think they also provide meals in their weekly meetings. So I think there's a lot of other ways to get involved, but definitely I think the best way to do it is through an agency. Let me know if that answered. Yeah.
And Ken, how are you doing?
I am sending it over to Kevin, who has graciously volunteered to run the slideshow for me.
Are there any other questions? If not, I could ask. Let's see. Wendy, I really liked, thank you for sharing. I took a screenshot of that, like the diagram of kind of all the, I think it was climate justice, energy justice, and environmental justice. I guess one like just general question. Sorry, I just put the question in the chat. It was short. It was really, really short.
Claire's asking important questions.
I was just gonna say, do you feel like if there is one of those three that you feel like has the most work still to move forward on, is there one of the three, or is it all three, like across the board?
That's a really good question. Definitely there's work to be done on all three. I feel that Acterra's wheelhouse is working on that, how are people accessing the clean energy part of the equation, but there's so many groups working on the climate justice front and the environmental justice front both. And I think a lot of youth voices are speaking up about justice, because there's also like intergenerational justice. Having an entire generation of people who have to deal with the impacts from climate change that they didn't cause, that's like another kind of injustice. So there's like global levels of North versus South and developed and undeveloped. So there's so many people working on this. And Acterra's part of it, I think, is probably more on that energy side. But yeah, many, many, many groups.
Thanks. I am going to start sharing the slides. I'm going to do it full screen. So Ken, as you're going, just say next slide, and then I'll go next slide.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. Yay! All right, sorry everybody. And again, thank you, Kevin. Well, I'll just dive right in. My name is Ken Chan, and I'm an organizer with the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County. I am definitely a super commuter. I'm one of those folks that you may have heard so much about, who but who does sit in bumper to bumper traffic. That slowly inches across the 92 on a daily basis just to get to work each and every day. So while my job is here in San Mateo County, like many others, like our essential workers, I commute from the East Bay because it's just cheaper to live there. And this is even after factoring the cost of gas and the increasing bridge tolls, which I would like to take this time to personally thank each and every one of you for voting. That's very much appreciated. Next slide, please. A little bit of background. So HLC, we work with communities and their leaders to produce and preserve quality, affordable homes here in San Mateo County. As of this year, we're a nonprofit that's been around for 20 years, and we envision a county that everyone who either works, lives, wants to live, or who grew up here in the peninsula can have a stable place to call home. Next slide, please. So what does housing have to do with environmental justice? Well, if we're going to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, we have to rethink how we design our cities. Next slide, please, Kevin. So first and foremost, here are two pictures with absolutely zero context, but I can elaborate. The image on the left shows that between 2010 and 2019, a little over 100,000 new jobs were created within our county, while only like 9,500 new homes were constructed in this same time period. This equals to about an 11-to-1 ratio. Generally speaking, San Mateo County has not produced as much housing as it should have. The graph on the right shows that in spite of two major recessions that we've experienced, job growth here in the peninsula has pretty much outpaced the number of housing permits issued in the past 3 decades. So why have we been creating more jobs than housing? Next slide, please, Kevin. Capitalism, plain and simple. Our cities have a financial incentive to build for jobs instead of housing. Commercial spaces provide payroll taxes, and hotels allow for the additional transit occupancy taxes. So when it comes time for our city councils to look at their budgets, and as they go through just line item by line item, trying to figure out how to pay for more and more services, they have to take into account that constructing commercial buildings will ultimately make more money for their cities. Next slide, please. So speaking of capitalism, um, because land is scarce and expensive in this county, we don't actually have a lot of buildings in general. And so why is that? Well, we have essentially two major zones, as indicated in the right image here in the peninsula. One, and that's land that's deemed as protected space, like the parks that we've all come to enjoy and will contribute to the very high standard of living here in San Mateo County. And two, land that is zoned primarily for single family homes. This doesn't leave us much to work with, unfortunately. Now, when we combine the lack of supply in land to build homes on with the pressures created by demand for these homes and created by the new jobs, and our cities building primarily for commercial on what we do have available, we increase the costs exponentially associated with purchasing whatever land's available that's left. But before moving on, I think I need to emphasize that it's important that we have protected space. We need greenery and trees and foliage to help mitigate the damage in our atmosphere caused by greenhouse gas emissions, or GHGs. So not only are these spaces good for the environment, having these options increases the quality of life, like I mentioned earlier, for folks here. And it's what makes this county such an appealing place to live. This, in turn, is what allows us to attract quality workers from across all spectrums of the economy into San Mateo. But however, because land is scarce, we need to properly zone and build homes to accommodate our community members, because anybody who wants to live here should be able to. Next slide, please. So besides giving everyone a nice big refresher on high school econ, what does it all mean when you combine all these factors? We end up creating a population of super commuters who have to look for homes outside of our county, like in the East and South Bay at best, and at worst a little bit further out, little relative. So that would be San Joaquin or even Merced County. Many of these community members are our essential workers, and they may not have access to clean air vehicles. With so many of these older cars that are now idling in bumper to bumper traffic on our roads, this is what in turn leads to an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. So as you can see on your screen, the red indicates the amount of vehicle miles traveled. But what we can also extrapolate from this image is that the red also represents single family zones and single family homes. So how do we begin to reduce the amount of vehicle miles traveled? Next slide, please. We zone for density to create for multifamily housing. As you can see in this circle chart, the largest contributor in the state of California to greenhouse gas emissions comes from pollution generated by cars and trucks on our roads. This is an important statistic to consider as if we would like to meet our state goal of reducing our GHGs to 40% below the levels that we had back in 1990. And that's, by 2030. And that's only 9 years from now. So we don't have that much time. So how does multifamily housing play a role in this? So as you increase density, you allow for a reduction in these emissions, because instead of folks hopping into their cars, folks in these homes and the nearby, the neighboring single family homes can now live near and walk or bike to access goods and services. This creates a much more sustainable community. In addition, if we locate some of these homes near transit, we provide our residents with an alternative to get to their places of work. And finally, this also allows for diversity in affordable homes where our community members across the economic spectrum can live, work, and enjoy the high standard of living here in our county. Next slide, please. So what is a major barrier to affordable housing here in San Mateo County? Next slide, please. That's funding. Affordable housing was already expensive to build, but it's getting even more expensive. This is due to things like the cost of lumber and the cost of labor. There are solutions to this, like prefabricated construction, but unfortunately, it's not quite politically popular yet. The cost of building an affordable home in California increased from $265,000 per unit in 2000 to almost $425,000 in 2016. And now in 2021, obviously, because of COVID, costs are a little different. And depending on where you're building, because the cost of land is different, but in the Bay Area, long story short, it's really, really expensive. Next slide, please. Another thing is neighborhood opposition, or yeah, let's leave it at that. So here are some comments about an upcoming proposal to convert an old underutilized building into affordable housing by the Sisters of Mercy here in Burlingame. These are just some of the comments that folks have openly made in a public forum. These statements include opinions that range from direct opposition to being supportive of the organization and its mission up until there's a perceived loss by the community member, and also attempts to discredit other community members in order to get their own point across. Besides their opposition, these comments also reveal another inherent human trait that has been driving the conversation against new affordable homes, and that is fear. Fear of change in this instance. Folks don't like change. It's scary and it's hard and it makes us all uncomfortable. But if we give into it, we're only hurting ourselves in the long run. Next slide, please. So now that I've gotten all the negative stuff out of the way, let's talk about what affordable housing is. Next slide, please. First and foremost, the three images you see on your screen are examples of affordable homes that are already built and lived in within our county. The term affordable housing is often used in a much more general way. For example, our community members tend to refer to affordable housing as a need, such as when someone says we need more affordable housing, or I wish I could find affordable housing here in the Bay Area. Next slide, please. So what does HLC mean, or what do we mean in our advocacy when we say affordable housing? We like to look at the definition that's used by our local, state, and federal governments when referring to housing that's affordable. That's when a household pays at most 30% of its income towards both rent and utilities for renters, or towards a mortgage and other associated costs of ownership for our homeowners. This includes insurance, taxes, and some very much, I guess, loved HOA dues. This definition recognizes that households have other essential expenses that include food, clothing, healthcare, childcare, and transportation. It can also refer to housing that's targeted to households with low or moderate incomes, covenants, agreements, laws, and or other enforceable mechanisms. Next slide, please. Please, Kevin. So, do we need market rate housing with all that's said? And the answer is yes. Next slide. Yes, we got there. Now, why is that? It's because not everyone necessarily qualifies for affordable housing. While the above image, or while the images on your screens show a range of job professions and their salaries, I need to emphasize that most of our low-income community members live in market rate housing because it's the only option. Wait lists can be hundreds of people deep, and the wait can be up to 10 years. So when we build housing, we need to build across all levels of affordability, and that includes market rate. It's a piece of the puzzle in addressing our housing shortage. Building homes at this level of affordability frees up homes that would otherwise be available to our lower income residents. This is because folks in the higher income brackets can now choose to live in these newer developments. And this mitigates the rise in massive increases in rents from year to year due to the high demand for such a low supply of available homes. Next slide, please, Kevin. So now, who gets to live in affordable housing? So let's first take a look at this chart with numbers. It's called the area mean income for our county. And it's specific to this year because these numbers are updated annually by our U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, also known as HUD. Now, just by taking a quick glance at these numbers, it's pretty obvious that the income limits are all kinds of messed up. Someone who makes $102,000 in our county qualifies to live in affordable housing. And why is that? It's because the algorithm is complicated and broken beyond repair at this point. While this slide alone can encompass a discussion in itself, I'm going to stop myself here. So with these limits in place, let's look at who qualifies now, or finally get to the point as to who qualifies. So next slide, please. And so before I do that, I think I need to also briefly address the talks about how COVID has shifted our workforce to either a hybrid or a work from home model for some sectors of work. While this is the case for some of us, the vast majority of the jobs in the Bay Area, the peninsula included, still requires its workforce to be on site. Like some of the jobs, like actually all of the jobs highlighted on your screen. Now, what do all these folks have in common? They are community members who are the first ones to be displaced and who may end up driving 2+ hours to get to work in their older and less than environmentally friendly cars. They also work extremely hard. They contribute to the quality of life that we all enjoy here in this county. And they support our local economy by not just working in it, but through their patronage of our local businesses and paying a sales tax to support all the local measures that we vote on to support. They are essential in more ways than one. And most importantly, before I go on a rant, they qualify, all of these folks in all of these sectors qualify for affordable housing. Next slide, please, Kevin. So how do we attain our vision of these walkable communities? There are three things that are needed for success, with some associated examples on how we can, or here are some associated examples on how we can reach each one of these. We need suitable land to accommodate higher density affordable homes. As mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, land is super scarce in our county, and we need to work with our leaders to find quality sites. This can be in the form of infill development, where empty and underutilized land can be chosen to build homes on, or through identifying and rezoning sites to accommodate higher density homes. We also need money. We can't deny that the costs associated with construction are really, really high here in California, and providing homes at deeper levels of affordability is just not profitable in a capitalistic economy. So we have to nudge our private developers to get them to do right by our residents. We can promote responsible development by having our cities require private developers to include affordable homes in their proposed commercial developments. The cost in rents from their office space and retail spaces can help offset these losses in profits associated with building homes set for our most vulnerable residents. And finally, we definitely need political will to get everything I mentioned done. We need to have conversations with our elected leaders about what's important to us and in our community. Well, with all that said, how can you help? You can support our work by becoming a member of HLC. If you'd like to take it a step further, you can sign up for our newsletters to stay in the know about what's going on in your community and how you can join us in taking action to support affordable homes. And next slide, and finally, here's my mandatory shameless plug. Please follow us on our social media accounts and Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or access to Nextdoor. Please feel free to email me, and you can also learn more about HLC by going to our website at hlcsmc.org. And thank you everybody for listening to my major spiel.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Ken. A lot of information to take in. And so I'm hoping now, we've kind of come to the Q&A, more Q&A / discussion portion of the event. And I think as all our speakers have spoken, what's really interesting is that from the face of it, when you're looking at providing positions for folks who have, for reentry or homeless folks, or you're looking at housing leadership, you're not necessarily looking at environmental justice per se, right? Or that might not be what you're thinking of immediately. And it's really this intersection of all these concerns of concerns like relationship to land and who is living in affordable housing where, and where is that being built, and how much commuting is happening and how much is contributing to worsening environmental concerns. So I think it would be interesting to hear about a little bit more about these intersections of concerns and how your organizations look at this and how you think we can actually approach these concerns, I think. And this is just anybody.
I'll let Wendy or Kevin go. I need to catch my breath. That's okay.
Elaine, could you re-ask the question one more time? Sorry.
I will try. So I think when we're looking at these concerns and the intersection of them, like, what do you think are ways of approaching this, and how are your organizations really approaching these current concerns? Like, why isn't it environmental justice matter, and how does impacting the one thing impact the other?
When you say the other, which other?
Or another, any other, you know?
Well, I can say that in terms of everything being related, it does present a challenge sometimes when people want the conversation to be focused on solving poverty and solving questions that are sort of separate from environmental justice, more just about economic questions. But in reality, these things are going to come to the fore more and more as we see more climate impacts happening, as we see the destructiveness of wildfires and the smoke and all of the stuff that happens when you can't go to work because the temperatures get so high that you can't do, you can't function. And it's actually documented that I think your brain is impaired under heat stress. So it doesn't necessarily feel like a current problem. And I think that's a challenge that environmental organizations face, that it's something that is in the future and it's not now. And I don't really have a solution to that, except to say that with every news cycle, we get more and more bombarded, stories about how much it's affecting us now. And so to me, it's not something that you can put off, because if you neglect this for another decade, you're baking in all these problems to just get worse and worse. And that's something that's really hard to explain to politicians who need their actions to be kind of justifiable in the moment. But I think it's very transparent to people who are younger that this is not going away. And whatever actions we fail to take now are going to have huge repercussions. I'm not sure that it really answered your question though, Elaine.
I mean, I think you pointed to just kind of the importance of looking at all the different issues, right? Like, and I think it is current. It's actually, I always think about the fact that, growing up, it was all about recycling and climate change. And I'm like, how nothing's changed? nothing got better. I mean, you kind of have that, what is it? It's like environmental theater, of being told that all this plastic can be recycled, but it actually can't be recycled. And saying, oh, but we can do this to make things better. But is that actually, at what point are we telling ourselves that we've got our own control, but there's also the larger impacts of really huge companies who are actually doing so much damage, and how much of it is generational, talking about zoning of housing and, talking about covenants, looking at who has wealth and who is living where, right? So I don't know. I always think it's interesting once you start talking about it, because everything is so connected, and, you mentioned working in the heat. We remember during the fires last year, pictures of farm workers who were in the smoke, and so, Kevin touched on also the the labor rights, right, of those who are also doing the farming. And, you know, what do we know as we're doing farming? You know, are we honoring the land, or are we destroying it? And that was my ramble. I apologize. Yeah, I mean, I guess in, you know, with all this, what are the biggest challenges you see among the movements?
That's a really big question. I can try my jab at it. I think Wendy alluded to one of the biggest challenges, which is just, I think, well, Wendy and Ken, kind of a combination of the two. Like Ken was mentioning, just how it's really difficult to get funding changes under a capitalistic society for things that are specific for environmental justice, just because in our society it's very profit driven, right? So if it doesn't make sense to make multi-family homes, or to preserve land for people, or whatever, then it's not going to happen, because that's just it. That's how our system is set up. And then I think the other challenge is then, well, we're supposed to talk to our politicians. We're supposed to talk to the people that govern us. And it's really difficult then too. I think there's a really big challenge in just the communication of it. So I think that's why stuff like advocacy is very important. And I think just becoming more knowledgeable, I think just being able to have the discussion around, like, what does environmental justice mean? What does it mean for you? How is it different from what it means to me? How can we get involved within our own community? But yeah, I think like the really big challenge around it is just the communication.
That's such a good point. I would also add to what Kevin's saying that really it's so important to listen to the voices that are usually marginalized and not heard. And so too often we just get the overriding power interests, like the big ag and the fossil fuel oil companies. You know, they've got the loudest bullhorns, and it's really hard to hear the smaller voices, but those are the voices that need to be empowered and lifted up. And as we're seeing with the Line 3 protests, you know, there's a lot of power in the grassroots movements. So if enough people can get together, you know, that can really make an impact and have an effect on these sort of existing powers that kind of need to be overthrown.
I'd just like to add, at least on our end, here in San Mateo County, we have 21 cities that have ultimate complete control over their land use. And so there is no regional approach, unfortunately, if we want to advocate for housing in, say, Burlingame, we have to go into Burlingame and go through the entire process of itself. This also means that the city of Burlingame can decide, all right, we need more revenue for our cities and services and our schools. So forget housing, let's just build for hotels instead to fund these services. And unfortunately, that doesn't lead to the environmental justice that the three of us are here trying to advocate for. This building hotels actually leads to more cars on the road and people driving to work in these hotels. And if we don't build for housing, we're just increasing our greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere.
Thank you. And there was a question in the chat, you know, what programs do you have to get youth more invested in intersectional solutions to environmental, housing, food, and racial justice issues?
I can chime in here that I think that there's a great potential with youth, and it's not so much encouraging them. They're already there, you know, they're attending city council meetings, they're making public comments. Like I guess Kevin just put in the chat, the Sunrise Movement. Yeah, they're so powerful, they're so with it, you know. Our role should certainly be to support them and be allies, but you know, that's not really where I see the greatest need. I see the greatest need with coaxing some of the older generation along with progress.
The question might be, how do we get everyone else on board, I guess. And I've heard people, you know, where you're like, oh, well, don't you want people to be okay in the future? And some people respond, I'm not gonna be here in 50 years, so I'm not worried. Which is concerning, you know, like how do you address that, or how do you fight that?
That's a
Kevin's
great
just making a face.
I know we're all just like except I think I don't know, Ken, your video might be frozen, or I don't know if it's just frozen for me. You could try turning it off.
Yes, Ken's video is frozen.
Either that, or you can hold this face really well.
Looks very intense.
Well, I wanted to answer or give my perspective, I guess, on the question. It's tough. I think I think about this question a lot with relation to the work that I'm doing right now. So I still help out with Farming Hope. I was the founder and I serve on the board, and I still like provide a lot of close advice, and just like still have kind of my hands in the operation. But now I'm doing work kind of as a chef instructor and as a writer. And in the chef instructing, basically, I'm working with San Francisco's food pharmacy, and they have patients who have been recommended a specific diet by their primary care physician. And on Fridays, I teach them a little food demo on Zoom. And I think the thing that I always return to is I'm not gonna like I have a background in cooking. I have a background in I was working as a chef. And I just know for a fact that people do not make food or eat it because it's healthy specifically. Like if it's really, really healthy, or if it like makes, you know, it makes a lot of sense, that's not going to drive people. So like as a chef, I think I have to make it delicious, and I have to include the story around it, which is something that brings people in and entices it. So I think for me, like the one thing that I want to say is, I guess, I think we just need to share more stories. I think we need to make it like irresistible. Like I think there's this element of like make this movement and make everything about it like sexy, and people will want to do it. People will want to talk about environmental justice. People will want to see how they can get involved in their local environment. And I think maybe that's why it's also at the same time a little bit difficult to reach some of the older generations, because I think they're not maybe as attuned to those types of things. But yeah, I think totally. I think it's just empathy building and sharing stories.
Love that. And also the unofficial Acterra motto is, if it ain't fun, it don't get done. So yes, building that community spirit is so important, because we wouldn't be able to get through all of this without each other. So definitely agree with Kevin there.
Thank you.
I could toss in my 2 cents. So at least when advocating for housing, I think what we've been using is to frame it in the sense of a loss, kind of like how I mentioned folks are afraid of losing something. So when you talk to somebody who may be on the fence, you can frame it as, what do you stand to lose if housing doesn't get built in your community? So an example would be, say, our teachers. Our teachers are most likely can't afford to live in the peninsula. They're most likely commuting in from the East Bay as well. So if our teachers are coming in tired and they can't focus because of sitting in grueling 2-hour traffic each way, the quality of education that your children that you've moved into San Mateo County to obtain for your children is going to suffer, because the teachers are just not on their A game. So I would frame it something along those lines.
And as you're talking, especially Kevin, as you're talking, it made me think of Adrienne Marie Brown, who we also read. So we also read Emergent Strategy, but she also has a book called Pleasure Activism, right? And so it's how do we make these things? We have to make everything kind of pleasurable, because that's how things end up getting done. Or how things actually might move forward. And so as you're talking about, like, Wendy, you're talking about how fun it is, and Kevin, you're talking about stories, and Ken, you're kind of like, okay, let's also appeal to these concerns. What are those forms that this can take place in? Is Is it documentary? Is it gamifying? Is it, having fun community initiatives, but making sure that it goes beyond just like a one-time event for somebody, How do we approach that or address that?
I love this question because I was going to try to find an awkward way to bring this up. But since Eileen, the San Mateo County Poet Laureate, is in the house, I feel called to read a poem. I do some poetry also and some organizing around that in the community. And I think like all that I'll say is I got a chance to do this little like residency retreat on a farm in Knoxville, Tennessee. And it was really nice to like see greenery and to be in a place where, especially like in that area, there weren't housing issues, like everybody was housed. And I think there's just this element of like when we live in a community where we have access to being our full selves and everything, like everybody thrives. And so then somebody can write a poem about the wind. This is called The Rhythm of the Wind. Wind is such a beautiful thing. It flows all around us. Tiny flies forced to real-time course correct to get from A to B. If you glaze your focus on the earth, you'll see a scape of green and summer weed flower blooms dancing to the rhythm of the wind. A big black and yellow bee lands on a petal dancer and makes its way round all the bountiful blossoms, hopping from one to another in an improvised choreography, taking at least a moment to dip every new partner lightly. They will spring back tall when the bee is gone. A strong gust announces itself with the brush and the trees. This wind has traveled by ocean. You can tell the way it uses forest to mimic the sound of receding waves on shimmied sand. The trees will pay no attention to the syncopation of the birds chirping. They will slow dance the day away to the rhythm of the wind. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. That was wonderful. I like the idea of the bee dipping. So let's see. I wanted to make sure if you all, Wendy and Ken, if you had anything else to add on that question and discussion. And we actually had a poetry event to kick off Burlingame Read, so it's perfect that Kevin also read some poetry to us in this event. So if you would like more inspiring poetry, that video is also on our page. But yeah, Wendy and Ken, I want to make sure I give you a chance to answer too.
I just really wanted to give a short plug to two things that Acterra is doing that are increasing community building. And one of them is a cooking class that we do every month, and you can find out about it on acterra.org/events. It's using induction cooking, which is like this really modern technology, which is kind of default in other countries, but is slowly taking hold in the US. And if you're one of the first 5 to register, we loan you a personal cooktop, and you can use it to cook with during the 2 sessions a month for the class, and it's free. So you can return it at the end of the month. And that's happening in July, I think the 2nd and 4th weeks of July, on Thursday, I want to say. And the other thing is we have a Facebook group for people who are interested in more sustainable eating, and people trade recipes. They just kind of like offer all kinds of tips, any new restaurants that they're interested in. And so you're welcome to join. And you can find that link if you go to our website and go to the Healthy Plate program. There's definitely links to the Facebook group.
And Jenny actually just put it in the chat. Thank you, Jenny, for being so vigilant with all the links.
For us, I don't believe we have anything upcoming. We do have something called Housing Leadership Day in October, where we host multiple workshops, just kind of holding kind of like panelists like today, informing folks about issues around affordable homes. in terms of direct community building, I can only speak as a organizer, where it's just plain old knocking on doors and listening to people and trying to utilize them and to get folks to show up to city council meetings to advocate with their stories for affordable homes in their communities. We also try to connect folks, especially in this pandemic, through social media. We've created a next door group primarily for San Mateo, at the San Mateo County, to not just create some semblance of a community, but to also activate folks as things come along down the pipeline.
Awesome, thank you. And I do want to ask, are there any other organizations or initiatives right now that you want to uplift?
Yeah, there's this little place called like the Burlingame Library or something, and they're doing plant cuttings, sharing, and a couple. No, really, like shout out to all the work that you're doing, Elaine. Yeah, I copied a couple of links that I'll add to the chat right now. I think one that I'm a big fan of in East Bay is called Actin on Verba, and they're just like an urban farm that works with children in communities of color, and I believe they do a lot of really cool radical stuff, like starting bank accounts for some of them and putting in some money and starting to teach them about economic sustainability, being independent. Yeah, and they have like a CSA, and you can support through that way. And I think a lot of communities are starting to have CSAs, so just like look for CSAs or farmers markets in your local place. And you did mention earlier a little bit about like taking care of indigenous land, and if you're like in the peninsula and the Bay Area, like where I'm at, we're on Ramaytush Ohlone land, and there's a lot of leaders from the communities that once were indigenous to this land that are talking about keeping the land sacred, about how to preserve the land, which is really important for a bunch of different reasons, as we kind of talked about today. So I'm putting their link in the chat. Yeah, and then one last one is just these authors of this book that, oh, it's right here, that like really changed the way that I think about food. It's called Decolonize Your Diet. And it's basically two women of color who are married, who are based in the Bay Area in Oakland. They were professors at SF State and CSU East Bay, just talking about how we can start to think about food and our relationship to food and reconnecting to the ancestral pathways that we used to cook food. So those are the three little plugs I wanted to make.
Awesome, thank you. And yes, I always I'm glad you shouted out, I think it's Sagarete Land Trust, since I know they work on rematriation efforts. So I'm glad you mentioned them. And I think Cultural Conservancy is another local organization that I was trying to connect. Oh no, Ken, we finally lost you. Hopefully he'll be back. Cultural Conservancy, which actually does teach workshops and sessions surrounding Native food pathways. So hopefully we'll be able to connect with them at some point as well, but check them out if you have time. Yay, Ken, you're back. And then I know, Wendy, you put quite a few organizations in the chat. I don't know if you wanted to say any more about them.
No, I'm going to try to put the links in. They're just great groups that are doing good work, and yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, so Nuestra Casa El Concilio, San Mateo County, and Climate Resilient Communities, and MESA program. And Ken, did you have any other organizations that you would like to lift up?
Yeah.
Or efforts?
Sure. I'd like to plug our regional partner they're called the Nonprofit Housing Association in Northern California. If anyone would like to really go for a deep dive in the housing policy, they work primarily on state legislation around housing issues.
Great, thank you. And I did put in the chat earlier a link to racecounts.org, who again, I always think of for looking at statistics when it comes to intersectional concerns of race and environment and economy and all these different things that are really interesting. And so I think my last thing then would be, do you have any parting words or like actions or anything, like one last thing that you want to leave with us? If there's something that we need to go talk to somebody about, or something that we can do to help kind of keep the conversation going. Hopefully we can do it at the library, but you know, in our own networks and communities, you know, what do you want us to go spread the word about? Nothing?
I can start. I'll tip my head in. So this might be a little too technical, but right now our cities are going through something called updating something called a housing element. This is where they need to properly zone for homes to accommodate for affordable housing that allocations that are coming down from the state. This is an 8-year. This is a 2-year process to determine where these homes will go, and they have to properly accommodate X amount of homes within an 8-year process. So for the city of Burlingame, for example, the city received about 3,200, a little bit over 3,200 homes that they have to properly zone to accommodate for beginning in 2023 and through the year 2031. This is an opportunity for folks to address their concerns and to drive the conversation in where they want to see homes, so that everyone who wants to live here, again, can live here.
I guess I'll say that one of the most significant things that we did this past year as an organization, Acterra, was we had Bill McKibben give a keynote for one of our big events, Promise to Our Planet. And one of the lessons that he left us with was this idea that no matter how much you want to create change individually, you will not be as powerful as you will be when you work collectively. So when you're thinking about these big issues, as much as we want to kind of make our difference and do our little bit, I think it's really important to join with an organization and combine your efforts with other people, and we'll have a much bigger role to play that way.
Thank you.
Snaps to that. I think there was so many resources just shared in the chat. I think they're all wonderful, and you know, just going through them like at your own time will be great. And I think the one thing that I'll say is I think when you're doing any sort of work in like environmental justice, social justice, anything where you're kind of putting like a new progressive plan into motion, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So I think, you know, the reality is we all have needs, we all have responsibilities, and you still have to meet those. Try to find ways that you can make a commitment that brings pleasure to you or brings, you know, some sort of satisfaction to you, and just commit to that. I think, you know, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of people. Just find the way that makes sense for you to do it and take care of yourself. It's a long process.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you, Kevin. And I do want to highlight Anita's comment in the chat, saying that in Spain, people in lower income brackets used to set up co-ops and covenants in order to pull their money together and plan for multifamily apartments. And I think that also really speaks to that idea of actually working as a community to care for each other and work together. And so hopefully, you know, that has been part of the conversation throughout this whole series. And hopefully it's something that we can keep talking about and going through with. And thank you, Anita, for really mentioning that and talking about that. If you did not get all the links that are in the chat, what I will do is I've saved the chat. I think you might be able to as well, or at least you should be able to copy it over. But I will make sure it goes onto that book list that we have on the Burlingame Reads website. And that way, hopefully, everything's there that all our panelists have suggested. And if you want more discussions like these, or more book discussions like these, let us know. I did put a survey in the chat. I will stick it in there again as soon as I find it again. And that'll help us, especially because this was part of a grant program. It'll help us just kind of know what we can do for you, what you liked. But also, let us know if you want us to keep going with these kinds, obviously this discussion never stops. And so we will always have something. But we love Parable of the Sower. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And we can always see what's coming out in the future and what else we can do at the library and the community. And hopefully this isn't the end of us, speaking with Acterra and Farming Hope and Housing Leadership Council, that, there's always more that we can do to make sure that we are involved in the community. So with that, I thank our amazing panelists. I think y'all gave a lot of information, and I just really appreciate it, and appreciate you taking your time to do this, and appreciate everyone for joining us on this lovely balmy Tuesday night. And with that, I'll say goodbye and thank you.
Thank you again, Elaine.
Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you.
Shout out to Burlingame Library.
Thanks. We're excited to be open again. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.